Hello there, and welcome to a DF2X special. We're going to be reacting and presenting our thoughts on yesterday's Xbox showcase. A lot going on there, a lot of new games, and of course, new hardware. Joining me to discuss it, first of all, John Linneman. Hi.
Hey, Rich. Yes, we're back again. This is the next show in line, so we got to talk about it. We already finished Jeff Con. Key 3 is over, so...
Yep. We've gone back to Jeff Con 5.
Yes.
And we're ready to talk Xbox. Hello, Oliver McKenzie.
Yes, Rich, we had some high expectations. Maybe they weren't met, but there's still plenty to talk about today.
Absolutely. Well, let's just crack on, right? Okay, the first thing we want to talk about is the new hardware reveal. And this is something quite different than what many people might have been expecting. No hint of a 10th generation console here. Instead, Xbox has collaborated with Asus to bring us the Xbox Ally and the Xbox Ally X. Two handhelds, both based on AMD silicon, also featuring stylings from Microsoft. And interesting stuff. I think possibly the software is more interesting than the hardware. But Oliver, your take on this?
Yeah, I do like the hardware here, I think. For a device like this, as I said before, I think the grip-centric design makes a lot of sense, and it should greatly increase comfort. They've got the same display, I believe, as the original ROG Ally, and the ROG Ally X, which we've seen for a couple of years now, which offers VRR, which is obviously really important for a PC handheld. The controls appear very high quality. I heard from some hands-on impressions that they are very similar, not to the Xbox controller, but to the original ROG Ally and the ROG Ally X. They have a very similar styling, very similar feel to those buttons, which is a good thing, by the way. I think that's quite a good set of controls for a handheld. On the premium version, you even get the impulse triggers from the Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles. So those vibration triggers, quite good for racing games. The SoC... in the lower spec version is a Z2A, which is basically the Steam Deck SoC there. In the premium version, it's a Z2 Extreme, which is good for maybe 10 or 20% additional performance above the Z1 Extreme, which you've seen in a lot of handhelds, like the ROG Ally, like the ROG Ally X, many other handhelds. The premium version also has an 80 watt-hour battery, which should offer some pretty impressive battery life for a handheld like this. My only concern really about these devices relative to other PC handhelds is their size, because they are very thick and very heavy.
Yes.
The higher end version is about 1.6 pounds, which is a lot heavier than the ROG Ally and Steam Deck, or at least quite a bit heavier. I think about 0.3 of a pound heavier. The grip should distribute that weight quite evenly and make it more comfortable, I think, in the hand than those numbers would indicate, perhaps. I think that there is one interesting point of comparison that we have now, which is the Switch 2. And I don't know, just kind of spitballing and thinking about the two devices. The Switch 2 is a lot more efficient, and it gets custom-built versions of games. It's thinner, it's much lighter. You can put a case on it, you can do all kinds of things with it. It also works seamlessly as a portable or dock system, whereas the Xbox Ally will undoubtedly be much clunkier in that respect. And the Switch 2 is a lot cheaper, and game performance in portable mode, so far at least from our testing, has been quite good. Dock mode's been quite good. It's been a fairly positive experience with respect to a lot of those key areas. So I do think that that is one wrinkle here, whereas I don't think the Switch 1 was a competitive device. I do feel like the Switch 2 is a competitive device in terms of the kinds of experiences you might want to play, right? And then also one key thing here, and this is my final point, and this is an area that kind of annoyed me about the Microsoft show. Microsoft is trying to pitch this Xbox Ally device in one of their videos. They're trying to pitch it as a console-like experience, which I think is a dramatic overstatement of what the device is likely to deliver, which we can talk about later in terms of the software. But it's not a console. It's a Windows PC fundamentally, and it will come with a lot of the hassles that Windows PCs come with. Even something like the Steam Deck, which is doing a lot more than this device to accommodate a console-like form factor and console-like use case, isn't quite in the console bucket for me personally in terms of ease of use. And I think that's an experience that Microsoft is going to chase with this device. I don't think they're going to reach it. So when they say it feels like an Xbox in their video, it plays like an Xbox. It's an Xbox class experience. They even say, if you've played a console, it's what you'd expect it to be. I have serious doubts about that. You know, if Microsoft wants to retreat from doing more formalized consoles, that's their decision, and I, respect that. But to get to the level that even the Steam Deck is at, you need to solve a lot of issues that I don't think they're planning to solve at the moment, or at least for the first incarnation of their kind of Xbox full screen experience for Windows, right? So they have a lot of room, I feel, before they can justify those kinds of statements that this device is a very console-like device and that it can compete with a console-like experience.
Yep, I agree. Also, the other thing which kind of irked me about the claims made for it was basically that the Z2A in the Ally is basically what, a 720p. You can run these games at 720p, and then the Ally X is Z2 Extreme is like 1080p. I think that was the claim being made. If that Z2A is basically on par with Steam Deck performance. Well, Oliver, I've seen some of your recent tests of AAA games running on a Steam Deck. It's not a pretty sight. We're using upscaling to get to 720p, and often from some games from 144p upwards. And still getting poor performance. And there was the claim made, I think, that all of the games being shown in that showcase are going to run on these machines. Man, it's, really? Really? I don't think so. That Z2A, I've got profound doubts about it. Secondly, the 16 gigs of memory that the A version has, the Ally version, there have been games already that have had problems with 16 gigs in the ROG Ally and Avatar being one. And I guess Alan Wake 2 at launch was another. I think they sorted that, but even so, that was a problem. You've really got to be at 24 gigs. The only one I'm really interested in beyond a sort of morbid curiosity is the Ally X, which I think is looking really, really strong based on what I know about the Strix Point APU. But even then, 1080p, nah, I don't think so. There's going to be a lot of upscaling going on there. The fact that you're not getting the impulse triggers on the non-X model, slightly annoying, I think. Don't see why they cheapened out on that regard. Otherwise, quite happy about the screen there. Obviously, it is an old screen. It is the same as the original Ally. But, ultimately, it's got VRR. It's got 120 hertz. And that is kind of trumps everything else I'd want from a handheld at this point, even OLED, if the OLED doesn't have VRR, that is. Have you any thoughts on the hardware here, John?
Well, it reminds me a lot of the PlayStation Portal, just at a glance, where it feels like they kind of grafted on Xbox-style controllers to the left and right of a screen. I also would say, now that I've been playing so much Switch 2, which is a 7.9-inch screen, this is going to feel quite a bit smaller, despite the actual hardware being significantly bigger and heavier, right? So, big hardware footprint, more weight, yet smaller screen. That's going to feel sort of less good, I think. I'm also kind of bummed out that the Ally X, which is the more desirable one, only seems to be available in black, where I think the actual, it looks more interesting visually when presented in white, which is the standard ROG Xbox Ally. So, but there is still some positive things to be said here, and that I think this is sort of a first shot at this, right? This is the beginning of things. This is not the end goal or the end product. The Nintendo Switch 2 is a system that needs to last for 8 years, essentially, right? This does not necessarily. I mean, it could last that for sure as basically a portable PC, but this is going to be a moving target, I think. And I think Xbox's approach to this interface from the public side begins with this device here, and it will continue to evolve. I mean, they've already freed up a lot of memory by not running a lot of the key Windows resources in the background, right? So they're doing things to ensure that this is a more performant version of Windows, designed with games in mind. Will it, 16 gigs maybe still not enough for some games for sure, but I think it should be adequate for the types of games that this device is going to be able to run well anyways.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I guess the big thing that kind of confuses me here is the messaging around it feels weird, in the sense that they're very clear about calling this a quote unquote Xbox, but it's not really going to run Xbox games, right? Like, in so much as it's not running like Xbox native games, Xbox Series X, it's not running 360 backwards compatibility, original Xbox games, as far as we know. Like, they haven't confirmed that one way or the other, have they, Rich?
No, they haven't. watched the Linus video, and it's like, yeah, you can play your Xbox games, and it's like you can play them via the cloud.
Yeah.
And the whole point of a mobile device is that it's a mobile. You can take it with you wherever you go, and
Precisely.
you can play your games wherever you go. It doesn't mean you can play your games wherever you go as long as there's a really good internet connection. That doesn't compute to me. So yeah, I've had a good think about this. I mean. The question is whether this is a PC or a console. Now, if it's a PC, then the concept of being able to run native games, let's put the horsepower out of the equation for a moment, is it going to fall foul to licensing issues, right? Because obviously,
Right.
if you're putting out a console called an Xbox, it should be running your Xbox digital library. And if it's not running your Xbox digital library, that presents profound issues from my perspective, right? Because you want to keep those people who've been invested in your ecosystem maybe for up to 25 years to buy into this. And you don't want their existing library, which could be, thousands of dollars worth of games, to suddenly not work. So I've been thinking about this. The OG Xbox, the 360, the emulators for those ran great on Xbox One, and even I think the Z2A should be able to do just as much as an Xbox One did. And the Xbox One ran the OG and 360 games like a champ, right? That should be doable. The question is, what happens to the Xbox One games and the Xbox Series games? Yeah, that's going to be curious. Maybe that there's some sort of, they'd have to come up with some sort of crazy arrangement with third parties to allow their PC versions to run.
But then it
First
would be
party, I'm not worried about.
And I don't know.
Yeah. First party games, not a problem, right? Because they'd just move you over to the PC version. The PC version's got Xbox Play Anywhere already. You're good to go. But elsewhere,
because fundamentally, there's no way that we know the horsepower to run like native Xbox Series X games in a small SoC form factor like this. It doesn't exist right now, right? Like It's just not a thing. So they can't do it that way for sure right now. But you're right. This idea of tying PC games to it maybe works. And maybe the idea is like it's with this whole Xbox store system that they already have, where they have a lot of games that are, they've been doing Xbox day one PC releases for a while now, right?
Yeah.
So there is a fair amount there, but you're still not going to get everything by any stretch of the imagination. And like you say, you'd have to do some sort of weird deal with third parties. And even then the support wouldn't be 100% across the board. And I just feel like this creates this whole web of confusion that they would then have to somehow communicate to their customers. Like, oh yeah, you can use these games, but not these games, but maybe these games someday. It's just, I don't know how well that works on that side.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what to make of this and how they're going to be proceeding with this kind of stuff going forward, especially, which is why when thinking about the future of their actual consoles then versus a handheld, like conceivably they could do another console that is still running this Windows front end, but has the horsepower to run Xbox Series X games, right? You can do that in an actual like console like device, essentially. Yep. It's just the portable side that really is kind of left out in the dark here. Yeah. So, but all of this just raises more questions about what the future of Xbox is going to be. Like you can kind of see where they're moving towards, but they've also got to find a way to keep everybody that's stayed with them for so long happy, keep their games compatible because they pushed that so hard. I don't know. I walked away just still kind of confused as to where they think they're going with Xbox as a brand right now. But maybe this is all just growing pains to get to that point, and they're just doing what they can along the way.
I think like their branding here is pretty unequivocal. It's like, this is an Xbox. It's a console-like experience. This is a console. This is an Xbox, that kind of thing. And I just feel like they're really pushing this narrative that you buy an Xbox branded Xbox Ally X, you're getting an Xbox experience. And I just have to say, big question mark to that. I don't think you will, really. I don't think in the material ways in which an Xbox is defined, you're going to get that experience. I think you're going to get a good front end possibly for navigating Windows. That's something they could deliver, but I don't think they can deliver an Xbox console experience in a handheld at this time with the software that they do have.
And that's actually raises a potential problem for the future, right, Oliver? Where you think about, like, if this gets out there, the public opinion forms on it, this can sort of cement what people think about this new hardware initiative, right? So even if they come along later and introduce something that really does satisfy all those points, they've seeded this notion that, oh, this hardware may not do everything that you would expect it to do out of the box, which will likely be the case with this thing here. So, but again, like you said, I am at least happy to see them making changes to Windows like this, and I hope that that actually raises another question. A lot of us already have these handheld PCs, right? Including original ROG Ally owners. Is Microsoft going to make this available to us? Do we know?
Yes, they are.
They are. So that's awesome. Then that could be a huge game changer for the wealth of portable PCs out there right now.
Yeah, I believe they've pledged support for the original Ally and the original Ally X, which I think is fantastic news. And I think we should probably shift the discussion more to the evolution of Windows because let's face facts, John, you and I have both been gaming on a Windows handheld, and Oliver, in fact, with your ROG Ally. And the Windows experience has been, I'd say, dire. They're making big attempts, big efforts here to actually revamp this. And this is the first time we actually got to see some of those features. So something you've been talking about for a long time, John, which is a games first interface that can drop back to the Windows desktop in the same way that Steam OS can drop back to the Linux desktop. That's something you've been talking about for years.
Yes.
We've got it now. It boots into the Windows front end that is gaming specific, a full screen experience, as they say. I'm kind of curious as to why full screen is the differentiating factor, but there it is. And they've also been talking about efficiencies made to sleep mode, so it can persist for 3 times longer. And I think you mentioned that they've cleared up, I'm not going to call it bloat, but stuff that isn't required for a games experience to free up a notional up to 2 gigabytes of extra space. The unified launcher, which basically means that if you've got your Steam games, you've got your Epic games, all of those games will become accessible via I guess it's the Xbox app, whatever this is that we're seeing here. That's all good news. And I guess this is their sort of route forward for how things are probably going to work on the next generation Xbox.
Agreed.
Yeah. What do you think about that, John?
So obviously we need to see more, but I do admittedly really like this direction here. Basically, they're essentially killing Explorer.exe, if you will, when you're running the normal, like, gaming focused version, replacing it, if you will, with a completely different interface, which is exactly what Valve is doing with Linux, right? And presumably you can still get back to the desktop then. Yeah, you're saying that? Okay,
I believe you can, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. So this really is, you get the full functionality of a PC, but by default, it actually boots up in this proper game-oriented user interface, which that could be the game changer. Like, obviously we need to test this for ourselves and see how it all plays out, but I think the reason they call it full screen, and they've stressed that, is just because the idea is that everything you need for a good gaming experience, to adjust settings, to do anything at all within the hardware, can be done from that interface using the actual interface presented to the player, i.e. D-pad, analog stick buttons, because fundamentally that's why the Windows experience has not worked well on those handhelds, because there's so many times where you're faced with something popping up and it's like, oh, I need to switch to the virtual mouse cursor, and now up here comes the keyboard. Yes. What's the shortcut to bring up the keyboard thing again? Oh yeah, it's this. Oh, it doesn't work that well. It's just constant, that sort of stuff. So getting away from that, making sure everything is completely functional with the buttons included and correctly mapped and everything, that could be a really big deal. And also, I assume that it'll handle driver stuff, hopefully similar to the way Valve does, where it's all kind of rolled into like updates to the system OS side of things. You know what I mean? Because like on the Steam Deck, you don't have to worry about drivers like a PC, right? It's all just embedded in the Steam update stuff. And Microsoft is going to need to do the same thing here, I think, for this to be effective. They can't have users updating individual components. It just needs to be, here's a system update, and they like fix things or like add features. That's what it needs to be. But then the other thing we still don't know, and this is what I'm very curious about, is how they're going to handle things like shader cache and other functions that SteamOS is so good at, to ensure that everyone has a really good experience. Because even if you have this great interface, if you load it up and you're faced with the typical stuttering that we often see, things that SteamOS has actually been really good at eliminating because they have a fixed hardware platform and can sort of pre-cache all of this stuff. I hope they have a solution for that as well. And
We're talking about a pretty fundamental revamp to DirectX to make all of that sort of stuff.
I know,
happen,
but like, if they need to do something if they want this to work, right? Like, if they can't just leave it as is, otherwise then it will continue to fall short of what Valve is offering. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but if this is the direction they're going, they've got to figure out something, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my concern is maybe they've made this interface, but I do think it is going to be work in progress.
Yeah.
Even when the device ships. I mean, maybe those emulators, the OG and 360 emulators, will be part of it. We don't know. That was the other thing. I mean, I did have a pre-brief of this last Friday, and there was no questions. You weren't allowed to ask questions. Had to divert questions to your Xbox rep, and obviously that was on Friday, so the chances of actually getting an answer back before they revealed the thing on Sunday is quite slight. Also, there was a good degree of YouTube videos on the likes of Linus, the Forks, Dave 2D, etc. But they were missing crucial information, which I'm sure, Carey would have been asking a bunch of questions, but apparently there weren't any replies forthcoming based on the content that we saw. So, there's it's just a lot of question marks that need to be resolved here. I mean, you're quite right. The driver update situation is certainly something that needs to be handled a lot more gracefully. It's a bit of a pit on the current handhelds. The other things they're doing, which I found quite interesting, is although it is primarily an Xbox piece of software, they're integrating the Armory crate from Asus into the game bar, which I found quite interesting. Yeah, I think they need a unified interface that works on everything. I'm not sure, sort of picking and choosing vendor-specific components to put into game bar. Maybe for a first effort like this. Ideally, you'd be looking for a more unified solution, which is exactly what the likes of Bazzite are doing on Windows, I believe.
Yeah.
Oliver, curious about your thoughts on this whole front end.
Yeah, I think that what Microsoft is trying to do here is they're trying to solve the interface problem, or part of the interface problem, let's say the biggest part of the interface problem, by booting into this quote-unquote full-screen Xbox experience that replaces the Windows desktop essentially as your first port of call for use with one of these devices. And they're also, they're talking about some improvements to system performance. They're talking about a big reduction in standby power. And like you said, Rich, a 2 gigabyte savings. They claim up to 2 gigabytes from not loading a bunch of components, not loading the Windows desktop, not doing a bunch of the stuff that you'd expect in a PC. Normally, they're not going to load those components. Providing all this works correctly, I think this helps a fair bit, I would say. I really wish this had existed in the market like 2 years ago when PC handhelds started to become fairly popular, when we had the ROG Ally being shipped in mass quantities. I think that would have been nice to see. But we do kind of have something similar to this on PC right now in some form, which is just booting your device into the Steam Big Picture mode. And a lot of this functionality is present there with a fantastic interface that is like tried and tested and true and really good, that Microsoft, I think, is going to struggle to beat. So that's one note here as well. Like there are a lot of things in this that right now in Windows with Big Picture mode, you can kind of get today. If we're talking about having a good launcher to explore and navigate a console-like interface, that's certainly there. But there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily being solved by this effort, or at least I have not seen any publicity that they're solving. Like it's not shit. I don't think they're fixing shit or compilation stutter from the bat with something like Fossilize. I don't suspect they're going to fix all the driver issues that people have. I don't think they're going to help you very much fixing sleep or zoom issues in games. They did talk, apparently, to, I think, Dave 2D about maybe fixing those issues, but I don't know if those will be part of this initial effort here. They're also not going to fix, I really doubt anyways that I have a way to fix this, but fixing mouse-centric launchers and interfaces in games. That is a critical issue that we see also in SteamOS, right? We see that in the Steam Deck, but the Steam Deck, it has 2 big trackpads. It has, big trackpads that make it very easy to navigate mouse-centric interfaces. And in this case, are you going to fall back on the thumbsticks? That's kind of miserable. Are you going to fall back on the touchscreen? That's also kind of miserable. It's not a very good experience. Those are not precision devices that are useful for navigating a tiny, tiny Windows interface. That's a huge pain. It's also not clear if they'll be pre-configuring games with optimized settings like we see on Steam Deck. That's quite a nice feature that Valve does. They do indicate they're going to have a program similar to Steam Deck Verified, but it's not clear exactly what that's going to entail, if it's just going to be like a badge, like, yes, this runs on your Xbox or Ally or whatever you want to say. I'm not sure what that will entail. So I'm very interested in this. I think SteamOS or Bazite is very hard to beat, and those are increasingly shipping on competitive handhelds that are competitive with this device beyond just the Steam Deck. Outside of game compatibility, which is better on Windows, and access to Game Pass, which is obviously a really nice bonus to get on Windows, I think those devices are going to be hard to beat in a lot of respects with this first generation kind of Windows Xbox effort. But I'm glad that Microsoft is trying to solve this UX problem, this massive UX problem. I hope they succeed. I hope they succeed in other areas, and I hope they spend some time, I hope they are spending time right now trying to tackle every single one of the key issues that we complain about, that Alex and I complain about in various videos, and John complains about, and Rich complains about, that make Windows a very imperfect choice for a gaming handheld.
Yeah, there's a few final things that I've got on my mind here. Steam Deck, I think it came out, February 22?
Early 2022? Yeah.
Yeah. And here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, winter 2025, with a device that has practically the same SoC. That's really bad. That's not great. So I can only assume, and this leads me on to my second point, I can only assume that they're going to be putting that device out at a very keen price point. And even then, I think there's going to be a huge comparison point there, which is, stuff like Lenovo Legion Go, the original Ally, which will be probably priced very, very similar. They've already had some pretty steep discounts across their life cycle. And those devices, in theory, especially if you can run this new version of Windows on it, will be better than this, certainly in terms of game performance. Secondly, let's talk about price. I mean, the Ally, the non-X version, could be quite competitively priced, I think. The Ally X, though, that's using top-end silicon from AMD, 24 gigs of memory, 1 terabyte SSD. It says to me that that's going to be quite expensive unless Microsoft can maybe use some of its purchasing power to get a sweetheart deal with AMD on that top-end silicon, which, I don't know, who's actually in charge of the supply lines there? Is it ASUS or Xbox? We don't really know. How expensive is that going to be? Because if it's like an $800 handheld, that is an Xbox, that's not going to go down particularly well. What do you think, Oliver?
No, I don't think it's going to go down particularly well. And when we start talking about the kinds of points of comparison that are going to come up here, I think the Steam Deck and its various incarnations starts at like $400 US with that like 64 gigabyte eMMC model with the LCD, and then it terminates at like $500, $550, somewhere in that range with the OLED models, with the various OLED models. So that's an obvious point of comparison. I think the Switch 2 is another key point of comparison now. That comes in at $450 US. That, in a lot of respects, like I was just playing Hogwarts Legacy the other day, the Hogwarts Legacy version you're getting on Windows is not nearly as performant, I'll spoil this, as the Hogwarts Legacy that you can get right now on Switch 2. Like it is a different version of Hogwarts Legacy, sure. Does it have some asset compromises? Sure. But it runs a heck of a lot better in areas like Hogsmeade, than the Windows version does on any kind of reasonable Windows handheld. So there are a lot of devices I'd think of, also old Asus ROG Allies that have the Z1 Extreme chip. That is a chip that's very similar to the Z2 Extreme chip in terms of performance, from at least the metrics that we do have. there's a lot of competition from a lot of corners, from consoles to SteamOS to other Windows devices, and this is a very busy segment of the market. And I do wonder exactly where that price will come in, particularly for the lower end model for that regular Xbox Ally, if that will actually be a competitive price, and if that will actually reflect a product that can actually go toe to toe with some of these other offerings.
Yeah, that Z2A even being called a Z2 actually winds me up. It's just outrageous. Final thoughts on this from you, John?
Well, I mean, this is one of those, we have to wait and see where it goes. This particular product isn't that exciting to me, but it is exciting, at least moderately so, to see them tip their hand as to what they envision for Xbox going forward. I think we'll see a lot more from them. But yeah, this specific device, it comes off as being kind of anemic. It's a little bit too little, too late. It's unlikely to solve a lot of the main issues we have with Windows handheld gaming right now. And a lot of it's just going to come down to, I mean, if they can really get this out here at a very competitive price, and market it well, they could find some success, I'd imagine. But I don't know. I just don't see this moving the needle much for them on its own. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. With that, let's move on. Okay, the next thing that caught our eye at the Xbox Showcase was the reveal of not one but two Final Fantasy games coming to Xbox consoles, one of which was quote-unquote shadowdropped. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, obviously it's out on PlayStation. It's coming to Xbox, which is a delight and a surprise. And that's going to be coming this winter. But Final Fantasy XVI, the more recent game, is actually out now to purchase. And purchase it I did. And Oliver, you took a look at it. So, yeah, I mean, bearing in mind our schedules at the moment, question is whether we're going to have time to actually do a full analysis of this. But I think your first contact with the Xbox version is intriguing enough already.
It's very intriguing, very intriguing. Oftentimes with these console ports to Xbox or PlayStation from another console platform that's extant, we don't expect too much, but this is like throwing me for all kinds of curveballs. So yeah, this is just a quick look. It's not a full review, obviously, but I compared a number of matching shots and a cutscene in the early game across the 5 mode and console variations we have here between PS5, Series S, and Series X, and the results are bizarre. So starting with Series X, it has 2 visual modes, a graphics mode and a frame rate mode, just like PlayStation 5. But the graphics mode has some weird problems relative to PS5. Firstly, the Series X is softer and lower resolution. So in this shot, the PS5 is at 1440p roughly, and the Series X is at 1224p or so. So that's a bit of a curious difference. Oftentimes we don't see that big of a resolution divergence between the two consoles, and oftentimes it favors the Series X in these comparisons. But in this case, it's favoring the PS5 by quite a large margin, and it's a lot softer. Both seem to be using the TSC-MAA plus FSR1 combo, but the PlayStation 5 version shipped with at launch. But the Xbox version is consistently lower resolution, and you can easily count the stair steps here. There seems to be a contrast difference between the two. I have both consoles set to default brightness in this game with HDR off, limited range capture, but on Xbox the highlights are not as bright and sometimes the shadows are a little bit lifted. It's really weird. There are some other minor visual differences, like some divergences in the grass shadows here, and there are also some issues in some shots where there's a dramatic divergence in the foliage rendering, where the Xbox just kind of looks broken in some trees and some bushes here, so that's very odd. Just as a sanity check, by the way, I did just like make sure there's nothing wrong with my system or something. I tested Doom the Dark Ages on both consoles. I quickly matched up some shots, and they looked identical in terms of the gamma presentation, the brightness, and the contrast, and all that good stuff. So yeah, just a weird issue with this game, apparently. Both of them run the game at 30 FPS without any particular drops. Both PS5 and Series X here generally do run the game at 30 FPS. Then there's the frame rate mode, which threw me for even more curveballs. So it's similar, but the resolution difference is even bigger. It's a huge difference. So in this shot, we're going back to this shot. PS5 is 1080p. Series X is 720p. So it's a lot lower. It's consistently lower throughout the shots I tested. I believe there's DRS here. It also has some level of detail concessions, so there's less detailed archways here and less detailed foliage. But in performance terms, the PS5 in this area is super wobbly in this opening kind of section, between 45 and 60 FPS, typically except in battle, where the res decreases and performance hits 60 FPS more regularly. That John covered that kind of optimization strategy in his initial video. That does seem to be the case here still. But Series X is basically a locked 60 FPS in combat and during exploration, outside of cutscenes, which run at 30 FPS on both platforms, but outside of those, Series X is at 60 FPS. Then there's Series S, which only has one mode. It gets further level of detail reductions relative to the Series X framerate mode, and it runs at a slightly higher resolution than the shot we keep going back to at about 792p, and it targets and generally hits 30 FPS there. So kind of more in line with what we would typically expect from a Series X conversion, or rather from a Series S conversion, which is basically, yeah, kind of delivering a 30 FPS experience that's similar to the other console's 60 FPS experiences. So I don't know quite what to think here. The contrast issue and a couple other issues I think need to be addressed. It's very bizarre. I don't recall that being a problem on the PC version, that contrast issue, when we covered it last year. In general, I'm kind of split on the Xbox optimization approach here on Series X, because I think dropping res to hit 60 FPS is a good approach, generally speaking. I do like that approach, but 720p with this kind of poor quality Intel TAA and the kind of FSR1 upscale, I think it's a little bit rough. Maybe something like FSR2 would produce a better result, but also this game is just really heavy. Like, it is one of the heavier console games we have at the moment, even 2 years out. So I'm not sure you'd necessarily get a good result in either case at 60 FPS, but I have been playing this game, by the way, recently on PS5 Pro. I've been playing through the DLCs, and even in the frame rate mode, it doesn't stay at a high enough frame rate consistently to stay within the PlayStation 5 Pro's VRR window. Like, it's often below 48 FPS. So FF16 is configured weirdly, no matter what way you think about it, what way you look at it, with the DRS behavior, with the Intel TA, with FSR1, with all this stuff, with how heavy it is. So yeah, in general, just a weird port. I think it has some significant issues. I think they do need to be addressed. But, you know, depending on how you look at it, the 60 FPS performance is a lot better than PlayStation 5 consoles. So if that's what you're after, regardless of whatever image quality hit you have to take to get there, maybe this is something worth considering, but I think there's some weird issues here.
I'm wondering if the conversion work actually came from the PC version as opposed to porting over the PlayStation 5 version, which may have caused some of these oddities and cutbacks where we don't expect to see cutbacks. Because that was kind of super, super heavy as well. When it's funny that when I'm listening to what you're saying about the Xbox version, it just makes me think of the PC version and some of the trials and tribulations we had with that version of the game, as opposed to the PlayStation 5 version. So yeah, curious. Any thoughts, John?
Wow, that was a gigantic amount of information, Oliver.
Sorry.
All that is to say is that, yeah, they just made different decisions with resolution, and it has some weird brightness issues going on. If we summarize it up, that's about it, right? No, I mean, I think this is, frankly, a game of just, it's one that I'm like, okay, it's a 30 FPS game, and I just accept that. But I think the motion blur is good enough where, like, and with the cinematics being 30 anyway, I feel like it feels pretty consistent and fine at 30. And it's just, yeah, it'd be nice if you could enjoy it at 60 with like non-basement tier visuals. But that, I feel like 720p and the combination of AA just doesn't work at 720p for me. I think it's just too low when played on a large screen. It ends up looking just kind of ugly. So I really couldn't use the performance mode on PS5, and it doesn't seem like it'd be great on here either, even though it does at least hit 60. Maybe if you play it on a small screen, it could look okay. And I don't know. I remember having issues even with the PC version not running that great for me either. So this is a weird one, this game. Just in terms of
I'm just thinking, obviously this is a late port, and the concept of a late port isn't really going to happen next generation because people would just buy it from Steam or whatever and just run the PC version on their 10th generation Xbox.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of curious as to what's going to happen at that point. What will actually happen when you want to play it on your Xbox app within the Xbox ecosystem with the stuff that they're adding here, like Play Anywhere? I mean, I guess there would be like the PC version would be brought over. There would be like some sort of optimization or optimized settings put in by default, perhaps. Would you have access to the PC settings menu? I kind of wish and hope that you do. It's going to be a weird situation when we move into next generation.
Very.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on this, Oliver, before we move on? It's kind of weird, though, isn't it? The whole situation, really.
Not too many. It just, maybe this is one of those ports that hasn't quite had the time and attention lavished that perhaps it should, and maybe they're making some different decisions. In general, I kind of wish if it's an option, maybe it's not, but if they could kind of just go back and kind of rethink their approach with the TAA that they're using with the FSR2 with, you know, different techniques, maybe they could get a bit of a better result. Certainly on like PS5 Pro, that behavior where it's like delivering a pretty good resolution but is still dipping the frame rate because it's the DRS is configured like Elden Ring's DRS. That is like a weird situation in some respects, but yeah, I don't know. It's a great game, but you know, it's been a couple of years, and I'm kind of happy to move on from it, honestly.
Okay, fair enough. Good stuff. Let's move on. Okay, another game that caught our eye at the Xbox showcase was Ninja Gaiden 4. And John, you're pretty excited about this one, right?
So yeah, Ninja Gaiden 4 was announced earlier this year, and they released it alongside. They released the info alongside a shadow drop of Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, which was a pretty interesting release, I would say. It's been a long time since we've seen Ninja Gaiden return in full 3D like this. It's a series I've loved, especially 1 and 2. 1 Black especially. But Ninja Gaiden 4 is a curious one because this seems to be co-developed with Platinum Games. And Platinum Games has gone through some difficult periods recently, but I'm still hopeful that they have what it takes to produce a solid action game. And I guess presumably they're working in tandem with Team Ninja on this. I would imagine that means doing a lot of the development duty on the technical side and actually implementing things while Team Ninja sort of helps decide where they want to go forward with the gameplay itself. It seems Team Ninja is busy with, as we know now, Neo 3, among other things, no doubt. So it makes sense, I guess, when you think about it, to outsource this a bit. But on paper, if you ignore some of the stuff that's been going on there with Platinum and everything, the idea of Platinum Games teaming up with Team Ninja sounds pretty darn amazing. And I'm really hopeful that they can actually do something great together. Whether that'll be the case, we don't know, but I do like what I'm seeing here. The action looks good. There's a good variety of weapons on display. The trailer does seem to operate at 60 FPS pretty consistently within the gameplay bits itself. And visually, it looks really good. I would say a cut above anything Platinum Games itself has ever done.
Wow.
I mean, their games don't traditionally look that great, do they?
It's a fair point,
right? Like, you know, they put out some competent games, but they're not always lookers. Nier Automata was okay looking, but then you had like Bayonetta 3, which is of course limited by the Switch, but it ran horribly and it also looked pretty terrible, I would say. So it's kind of mixed. Sometimes their games look good enough, but nothing really outstanding. This, I think, is a fair step up for them. So it does make me wonder about the technology behind it. We haven't seen Platinum embrace Unreal Engine or anything like that. And Team Ninja itself tends to favor its own in-house engine as well. So between them, I'll be curious to see what they go with, because Ninja Gaiden 2 Black was Unreal Engine, but that was sort of like a graphical layer grafted on top of the existing game, right?
Yeah.
Either way, we'll find out. It seems like in October, since that is the set release date, October 21st. I'm excited to check it out.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Unreal to me, but then again,
It does not.
You know,
But
what can they say? We just don't know.
we don't know.
Oliver, what do you think?
To me, it kind of looks a little Astral chainy. I wonder if it's based off that engine. You know, just kind of the way that everything looks.
Totally possible, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe it's just you know, similar artists working with similar kinds of game content and whatnot. That could also be the case. But I think it looks quite good for what it is, and I'm excited to see what they do with Ninja Gaiden. I think they're probably a good fit for continuing this series, and it looks good enough. I don't think they're pushing like any crazy technology,
No.
but hopefully it can run with a good performance level, and hopefully they can achieve, you know, a good artistic vision within its confines. But I think this looks pretty good so far.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, ultimately, a game doesn't have to look ultimately state of the art. You know, it doesn't need to be using Lumen and Danite, you know,
Certainly not.
to get these cutting edge features. If for a particular game type, you know, this game has got to be fast, it's got to be responsive, it's got to kind of honor the legacy of the franchise. And I think this trailer was a good step forward there. Let's move on.
Well, I was going to say, Rich, they did actually use Lumen and Nanite for Ninja Gaiden 2 Black when you get right down to it, which is kind of funny. But and it's also interesting that legacy wise, if you think back to it, Ninja Gaiden on Xbox was absolutely state of the art. That was the Team Ninja that was pushing graphics at a level beyond most developers in the industry at that time. And Ninja Gaiden was absolutely one of those. It was just hugely impressive visuals, all running at 60 frames per second. Have you ever had a chance to play through those games, Oliver? The originals?
I've played the original Ninja Gaiden Sigma on PS3. Well, not quite the original, but yeah, on PS3.
Sigma, I see.
Yeah.
No judgment. No judgment. But, you know,
no judgment.
Black is the way.
I don't think I beat it, but I played through a fair bit of it.
It's a good game. Love them. But anyway, let's move on.
Yes. Thanks, John. Yeah, the next game which we wanted to talk about, or specifically Oliver really wanted to talk about it, Persona even 4 Revival. You were quite excited about this one, right?
Yeah, I kind of feel like with this trailer, although it's very short, it's very much a teaser trailer, I think Atlas has answered my prayers. Not only for a remake of Persona 4, which I'm very excited for, but to do it with genuinely good-looking visuals from my perspective. Like Persona 3 Reload had a crisp, beautifully stylized look with stunning menus and characters. But one complaint that I alleged in the piece I did on it quite a bit is that the diffuse and direct lighting looked pretty bad. Like they just kind of skipped it for the most part. They had this really light SSAO, but everything was very flat. And this trailer feels like it was made kind of to respond to that criticism. Now, I don't think it was, but like, you know, you look at the trailer and everything is drenched in this indirect shade. The streets of Inaba, every shadowed area has these deep pockets of shade that ground the environment very effectively, ground objects very effectively. It's not 100% realistic, but it works really well here, I think, within the kind of stylized art style. The shadows are softly filtered and quite high resolution, and there's a really nice stark clarity between the super bright highlights and the more kind of complex and rich shadowed areas. It looks kind of light mappy to me. Like, I'm not sure it's like doing anything too intense in terms of the technology, but I think it looks quite good. And modeling quality is also greatly improved relative to Reload. It might seem like a small thing, but like the roundedness of the classroom desks and the blinds that move in the wind, that's all stuff you never really saw in Reload. You know, Reload was sparing polygons like a title from 15 years ago or something, and here it just does not seem to be doing that at all. Yeah, another key thing here is that the title is not supporting last generation consoles, so this will be the first big Atlas RPG to run exclusively on current generation consoles. I don't think they were ever really maximized the capabilities of last gen consoles. I think they had some pretty good looking efforts in the PS3 era with titles like Catherine and titles like Persona 5, which is fundamentally a PS3 title. But, you know, this is more modern looking than anything Atlas has shipped so far. But just this kind of one final note here. I think they are pretty early in development. They didn't attach a date to it. It's not even a vague 2026. I could imagine this being 2027 or 2028. This is not showing off. Yeah, I could totally. This is not showing off any animations, UI, key events, battles, voices, scripts, just some pretty static shots of the town. And then some stuff that it's pretty placeholder, like the slightly bizarre movement of the trees around the shrine in this shot. And the way you navigate around these stairs also seems pretty rough. But yeah, I'm super excited for this. I think there are like a few complaints you could have, like the screen space reflections they've got in there. I kind of hope they would skip those because of the RT reflections they had in Persona 3 Reload. Those look quite nice. But yeah, I'm just excited for this. I'm also like imagining, you know, all the kinds of stuff they could do with it in terms of like the original PS2 version of the game, not the golden remake of the game for PS Vita, but the original PS2 version of the game had this very thick fog effect. Doing that with volumetric fog in the year 2026 or 2027, that would be really cool. I think there's all kinds of things they could do with this. I think this is Unreal Engine. I do strongly think this is Unreal Engine because of the way it looks and because they used Unreal for Persona 3 Reload, and I think they're probably switching to Unreal more broadly speaking within that studio.
Mm-hmm. Very, very short teaser there, John, but have you got any thoughts on it?
Wow, I have more thoughts on what Oliver's saying than I do in the trailer. I feel like you were a little bit too harsh on Persona 3 Reload because I feel like that specific stark look of it was very specifically chosen. Like rather than, because Persona 4 always struck me as like sort of a warmer game, so to speak, where you would want more natural like ambient lighting and like indirect lighting, where Persona 3 has this very harsh, like intentionally high contrast look to it that doesn't really, so I don't know. I always wondered if that was like an intentional stylistic choice just based on what Persona 3's world is, but I still thought Reload looked freaking great. It was a beautiful experience and it was a big improvement over the original. I felt anyway.
Well,
So
it's kind of funny. Yeah, I mean, there are some things that, I mean, I think there are a lot of areas in which it was hugely improved over the original. But if you go back to that original and you look at certain areas like the dormitory, that is a moody area. That is a moody area with a lot of dark, lots of shadows. It's kind of a moody area. And then the remake, it's just like very bright and uniform and no kind of indirect light, approximation of indirect light at all. So I think there are a lot of scenes in that game. You look at the PS2 version, you look at the new version, and they're very different in tone in terms of that indirect.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So but I totally take your point on board there.
I can see your point for sure as well. I fully understand where you're coming from. I just thought it still looked pretty cool in the end. I was happy with the overall presentation, especially just I felt like the main thing they got right over the original was just the feeling of running around, the animation work, and just the general like feel of the game was a lot better, which was nice. But yeah, I played through it last year, I guess, fully in Japanese even, and really enjoyed the experience.
Really? Yeah.
It was an awesome game, except for I had to import it, I believe, because if you bought I wanted the physical copy, and if you use the European one, it doesn't have that language option, I believe. So I had to import that as well, which is annoying, and they'll probably do that again, knowing Atlas. So
yeah. And then there's kind of like one other thing, which is not really technically related, but like Persona 3, I think, is aged really well in terms of its themes, in terms of its plot, in terms of everything they were doing with the game.
Yeah.
It translated really well into English, especially with the revised translation. I think they did a really terrific job. Suffice to say that some of the themes in Persona 4 and some of the topics have not aged very well in terms of the handling of certain sensitive topics. And I kind of wonder how they'll change those things, in particular because Persona 3 Reload had some DLC recently called Episode I guess, where they did kind of take what was this key central conflict of that DLC in the original game, and they really kind of made it so like all the characters no longer hated each other, and they kind of really softened it. So I hope if they do touch on some of those themes, or if they do try to address some of those arcs, maybe they change them more fundamentally than just trying to soften and weaken it, because that really got to me in that DLC. So anyways, I hope they do something interesting with it. I hope they do something really bold with it. And I'm really excited on the graphical side, at least, that they're adopting a bit of a different approach perhaps here. Again, perhaps that was made for stylistic reasons, so right. Some technical information there. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they do with this, but I also don't expect to have it for quite a while. Considering, Persona 3 Reload, that was the title that was in development for 5 years. These games take a long time. So
what about Persona 6, guys? Come on. Jeez.
Eventually. I mean, I hope, but it might be a while.
We'll see that in 2032, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
The only thing I've got to add is the splash screen at the end didn't actually mention anything other than Xbox consoles and Xbox PC. Oh, and Xbox Cloud. No mention of PlayStation there, which beggars belief slightly.
They did comment later on in a separate press release that it's for all the consoles you mentioned: the Xbox Cloud, the Xbox PC, the Xbox, and also PlayStation 5.
Xbox Series, Xbox X, One X,
Ally X. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, then. Well, let's move on to our next topic, and we're going to be talking about Beast of Reincarnation here, which, well, it's certainly something I didn't expect. Oliver, what do you think about this one?
Well, I mean, the key takeaway from this game is that it's a Game Freak title, which people are quite stunned by. Obviously, Game Freak, they've done non-Nintendo titles in the past, even in recent history, but oftentimes they're a little bit lower profile than this game, I would suggest. And here, this is like a big Souls-like effort, and it looks all right, although Souls-likes are a dime a dozen these days. But I would say in classic Game Freak fashion, this has some big performance drops. Big performance drops, and that does stand out to me. Now, of course, it's important to recognize this is pre-release footage, and you don't want to be judgmental of it. And of course, things do change a lot over the course of development in terms of hitting their performance targets. But it's still like, at probably like 15 FPS in some of these close-ups. That's quite a poor performing game. So I hope they bring that up to a performant level. I know that some people were looking at this and saying, well, why doesn't Game Freak just do this on Switch? I think there are a lot of reasons why they don't do this on Switch. But yeah, I hope they can bring this up to a level that would be good. And I'm kind of interested to see what they do with the concept of a Souls-like game, because from a company that really has almost entirely made Pokemon games for the last 10, 20 years, I'm kind of interested to see what they would do with a different kind of genre, a different kind of approach on a different kind of action game.
Yeah. John, thoughts?
It's funny you mentioned the performance stuff in Game Freak. They had the same problem even going back to the Mega Drive days. If you ever played Pulse Man from Game Freak for the Mega Drive, it has so much slowdown. It's honestly insane, which is not something you typically saw in 2D side-scrolling games on that system. So it feels like they've just never been able to get a handle on performance in their games for some reason. And yeah, we'll see. Maybe that's for the same here. I guess I'm curious to see, is this actually in-house Game Freak? Is it somewhat, like, are they working with another company here? Like, I don't know. I'm curious to see, because I'd be surprised if they internally had the resources to handle a big project like this while also continuing to do the Pokemon stuff. Or maybe this is like their way to escape the Pokemon mines for a little bit. It's like a reward for just like, okay, guys, we know you've been creatively stifled. Here you go. Go get your creativity out by making a Souls-like. Although wow. I do like the growth mechanic stuff they're showing. You notice like the vines and plants and everything sort of like procedurally sort of generating around the player. I think there's some potential there, and I'm curious to see what they do with that. What do you think, Oliver? Unreal Engine?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's unreal. And also, by the way, I mean, just judging, I know that they've recently improved this quite famously, but going back to a game like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I kind of think they might benefit from switching to Unreal for more projects, frankly, even if the performance is not so great. Just because, what they're achieving visually here, I mean, it looks quite attractive.
It's fantastic.
I agree. And just what they've done with Pokemon, man, it's not great looking. But there's some simple things they could have done to make those games look so much better that they just don't do. That always surprises me. But yeah, it's nice to see Game Freak pumping out at least attractive looking visuals.
Yeah, I mean, the whole performance question. It's unfair to talk about performance in a pre-release trailer. That said, and it kind of comes down to some of the stuff that which we talked about previously about Microsoft showcases, which is you never know what system it's running on.
Right.
The disclosure was still poor this year.
It was running on Switch too.
I suspect most of it was probably running on high-end PC, because they did seem to be maybe even mandating native 4K for most of the stuff we were seeing here. But we'll talk about that later. But what can I say? I really like the concept of it. I think it looked fantastic. Certainly has character. But yeah, you're quite right, Oliver. Some of it did seem to be in sort of circa 15 frames per second territory, which is, well, if you're going to be putting your best foot forward first time for showing a game, you don't really want that, right? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so perhaps getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but the Xbox Showcase concluded with a one more thing style presentation, which initially looked quite promising. CG info for something. What was it? We just didn't know. I was looking at some of the live stream comments. It's like Titanfall 3, it's back, it's happening. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a almost needless introduction, CG based, for COD Blob 7, Call of Duty Black Ops 7. Oliver, you called it, I think, in our pre-show chat, a bait and switch. Would you care to go into a bit more depth?
Well, this was teased by Phil as like the last big thing, the one more thing of the show, right? And they open with this CG trailer, this kind of nondescript CG trailer showing a robot, showing this guy. And I'm kind of thinking like, okay, well, this is like probably showing something really big, something ambitious, maybe a new IP, something like that. It's running at 24 FPS. It's clearly an offline render, so not indicative of like real game graphics, but looks interesting. And then I see the TV room and I hear Mason, and the jig is kind of up. And it's Call of Duty. It's Black Ops 7. I kind of feel like every Call of Duty these days is a Modern Warfare or a Black Ops, or, that's really all they're into these days from a franchise with like, how many entries? Like 22 entries. I mean, many more than 22
Well,
entries,
to be fair, Oliver, the surprise here is that it's Black Ops 7 1 year after Black Ops 6. They usually didn't, they wouldn't usually follow up a Black Ops with another Black Ops, right?
That's the surprise. That's the surprise.
That's the surprise.
But it's really Black Ops 3 in a sense, because I think it's a sequel to Black Ops 2, a direct sequel. Anyways, this is all getting in the weeds here. But they have some very brief snippets of like in-engine stuff towards the end of the trailer, but it's hidden by like a distortion effect. and it kind of looks like Call of Duty has looked for the past 5 or 6 years, at least from what I can see, although it's very limited. And it comes out later, of course. This is coming out for PS4 and Xbox One, as well as the current generation systems.
Good lord, dude.
Yeah, 5 years, 12-year-old consoles that came out when I was like 18 years old. It's still...
There's got to be a strategic reason for it. There must be a lot of users that haven't transitioned across to the new generation of consoles, and opens the door, of course, to Switch 2 port, I think.
Yeah.
Which I think is a
But I think it's like, it just... Like, we already knew a Call of Duty game was coming. It's a CGI trailer. We're not going to show you any gameplay. We're going to ship it on consoles from 2013. And it's just kind of like, I'm sure it's good. It will be good in the same way that all recent Call of Duty games are good. But it's pretty unexciting at this point. And I kind of feel like, especially for one more thing, you should at least show me something that's interesting about the game. Like, try to pitch me something that's interesting about this Call of Duty game, or give me something that's worth clinging on to if I haven't liked previous games, instead of just showing me like this super generic footage of just random shots of Call of Duty explosions and trucks and mini guns and things like this. And it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's just deeply uninspiring on a level that I feel is not befitting of like a final showcase game in what is still the biggest showcase probably in games, which is the Xbox show. So I think it's just
it wasn't particularly inspiring, is it? Because a Call of Duty game annually is a given. So it was kind of surprising that we didn't see anything more substantial. I mean, because it's going to be well along in development. There should have been a lot more to get excited about. It is true that sort of optimization and whatnot is pretty much done in the last few months of development. We've seen a number of E3 trailers for Call of Duty games that haven't been running optimally. But even so, surely, when it comes to Call of Duty, the pitch has got to be, why should you be interested? Because, each and every year a new one comes along, why should I be interested in this game? And you don't do that by providing a CG trailer and some sort of hints about what may or may not be happening in it, in the actual game. Maybe there'll be something happening for Gamescom, who knows? But it was just weird, wasn't it? Particularly when... it was a showcase that didn't have any of the Xbox tentpoles, their tentpole franchises being showcased really at all. So it was weird and odd and all manner of strangeness going on there. And a bit of a letdown, which isn't what you want to end your showcase with. John?
Is this not a tentpole, Rich? How do you define tentpole? This is the.
I'm talking about something that's traditionally big for.
I know. I agree with you. Right. This is still fundamentally an Activision game. They own it, but it doesn't feel like the traditional Xbox. So, I agree because, I don't know, man. It is weird. Like, Call of Duty is huge, but this kind of stuff, what they're doing with the story, while kind of interesting at first, I feel like that doesn't really resonate with the overall Call of Duty audience, so I also am a little bit confused by this. I'm not sure why they thought this was a good way to end the show, especially when sort of name dropping some other things that we'll talk about directly and then showing none of them. Right. It just it's a very strange one. And I guess, like, we're at the point where, like, when you look at what they own now, from the third-party publishers that they purchased up, you got Bethesda, right? Bethesda has been a heavy hitter, but Bethesda is dry at the moment. They've released a lot of amazing stuff recently, and it's kind of like break time for Bethesda while they get back to doing, new stuff, right? So Activision, I'm at a loss for words here because it really is a puzzling way to end the show, at least the way they built it up and hyped it. And it's especially bummer when you look at just how cool, like, the CGI stuff they show in this trailer actually is. And that because it's Call of Duty, they're not really going to be able to act on it and do anything particularly new or different with it. And fundamentally, that's the bummer, right? It's probably not going to match this. It's going to be more Call of Duty, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just, it's not going to be surprising or unexpected in any way.
Yeah. And even just from a rendering perspective, like, is it even going to have, ray tracing this year? Are they going to do anything interesting with it? Like, they kind of dropped that, It's just like, I'd love to see them do something cool with it, that at least kind of, came within the ballpark of the ambition of like this trailer, just show me something interesting. But I kind of feel like we're not going to get that. I'd love to be proven wrong.
Man, I feel like ending the show with this is like ending a Sony show with like The Last of Us Part 1 remastered or something. Just
those are fighting words, John. No, I get your point.
But yeah.
Okay. Let's move on, because we were talking about comments made by Phil Spencer at the end of the Xbox showcase, and he teased a number of games which I'm kind of surprised we didn't see to any extent at all.
Nope, nothing.
Those tent poles that we were kind of expecting, and we've got a quote here direct from Phil saying, "I'm excited to share that players will get to celebrate 25 years of Xbox with a new Fable, the next Forza, Gears of War E-Day, and the return of a classic that's been with us since the beginning." And you look at those games. We've seen Fable already. We haven't seen anything on Forza. That would have been an amazing one more thing, right? Gears of War E-Day. We had a trailer last year which didn't really show anything of the actual game. Would have been lovely to see that in this particular showcase. The return of a classic that's been with us since the beginning has got to be everybody is speculating that it's a remaster of the original Halo Combat Evolved. Another one. Yes. Which many are suspecting is going to go multi-plat, as they say. So, yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's very odd that they've got all of these games which we've either seen before or we'd love to see, and we didn't actually get to see any of them. And then you sort of segue seamlessly to a one more thing, which is Call of Duty Black Ops 7. It's kind of a bit baffling. What's your take on this, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is just like, could we have seen a little bit of one of those games? Like, that's a crazy stacked 2026 as far as I see it. Especially like new Forza. I mean, I'd presume that's a new Forza Horizon, I guess. Like, that's exciting. Everything's exciting. And a Halo 1 remake next year. That's also really cool. I just kind of like look back and like, Fable is penciled in for 2026, and that was announced in 2023, or I mean, it was announced before 2023, but it was shown for the first time in engine in 2023 with that big trailer with Richard Iowat, I think, in it, and it was like this really exciting thing.
Oh yeah,
and that was showing off a game that now we know wouldn't come out for another 3 years, right? So is there not a possibility they could show some brief tease, or at least a title of something, or someone getting up on stage and showing some concept art and talking about how this game makes them feel or something? Just like, normally I wouldn't be happy with that kind of showing, but I just feel like in the end, getting Call of Duty and not really seeing any footage of it even, that is just such a letdown relative to these games. And I feel like, it would behoove Microsoft to actually show off one of these games and really prove why 2026 will be really exciting for people who are interested in games and people who are interested in Xbox with one of these titles, because I feel like that should have been part of the presentation.
Yeah. John, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I also agree that would have liked to have seen something. I mean, a lot of this stuff's been in the works for so long. Like, it just feels like they could have teased something more to get people excited. But I mean, these sorts of presentations are obviously difficult because they put a lot of demands on development resources, right? And asking them to have a demo ready, that's a huge ask. It's like, yeah, we need to show something at this show. Like, I can also respect them making the decision, or maybe offering it to their, the development partners there. Like, hey, do you guys want to show it? If they're like absolutely at the point where they don't want to devote the resources to it, I can respect that. We actually have no idea like what's going on in the back there. But I think the disappointment for the overall showing just kind of stems from they've had such strong showings in recent years. So this feels like a little bit of a downturn in a way, but at the same time, again, I can understand how that would happen after a while. So you're just not always going to have all the bangers ready at hand, but still, like Gears, especially Gears E-Day, man, like it's been a long time. And I still am of the opinion that we're going to see the quote unquote true power of Unreal Engine 5 emerge from that game. So we're all kind of waiting for something more, and that because they've already now revealed it in that sort of pre-rendered trailer, I was really hoping we would actually see something from it, like proper gameplay finally. But I guess again, that's resources. Maybe they don't want to commit to it, especially if they're working with that remaster of Gears of War 1, which we'll talk about in a moment, I guess. So yeah, I don't know, man.
Okay, well, let's sort of summarize, bring things to a head here, because we've not covered a lot of the games that are actually in the show. And I don't know, what can I say? I came out of State of Play thinking, okay, so there isn't any sort of quote unquote AAA juggernauts in there, but I didn't care because the games that we saw were sufficiently varied. They looked fantastic. And yet with this one, I just didn't really feel it as much. It's kind of weird because I feel that I'm at odds with the sort of group thought on it based on the sort of rankings that you're seeing in Twitter polls and stuff like that. But I found it really difficult to get excited about this particular presentation. And yeah, I mean, what can we say? Even games that I'm kind of really excited about looking at, like In Exile's Clockwork Revolution, for example, just thought the presentational method that they used for it was sort of lacking context. Didn't really sort of fully get what was going on there. I think they could have probably done a better job there. And then there's sort of a lot of games, you know, the old trailerification complaint that we've had for years now, which is just like game A, wish list, game B,
wish list.
Yeah,
new reveal or whatever, world exclusive,
world premiere,
world premiere. There it is.
Yeah, spelled PRM apostrophe EAR. But John, what do you make of the whole thing? Because I think there was just the general sense. I mean, I kind of went into this one like fully pumped because let's face facts. I'd say this has been ultimately, you know, tail end of 24 going into 25. This has been like Xbox delivering time after time after time, awesome game after awesome game after awesome game. And then we sort of arrive at this particular showcase and it's like, okay, that looks all right. Okay, yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not a bad show by any means, and they showed plenty of good games, but the show itself and the way it was all presented and sort of like all merged together, it just didn't really excite me in any meaningful way. And but at the same time, it made me like, whenever I encounter shows like this, I wonder, like, is it me, or is it just like, I'm not like, have I seen too many of these shows now? You know, like, am I too old? It's just like, but then I remember there are still shows happening where I do feel that tinge of excitement again. So I know it's possible. It's just here. This just feels like kind of like an off year, if you will, where they just don't have that much that's really exciting. It's like, here's a bunch of good stuff, a lot of which I would probably enjoy playing, but you know, something like the Outer Worlds 2, for instance, I think that's going to be a very good game, but I'm not passionate about the Outer Worlds. You know what I mean? It's like good game, but not one you're super excited about. And maybe there's plenty of people that are, but it just doesn't have that factor in it. So so I can't say it was a bad show, but I can't say it was one that got me super excited either. It was just kind of a thing where you're like, okay, well, here's more of what's coming. Nothing really surprising or unexpected out of this.
Yeah, Oliver?
You know, the Xbox showcase every year is kind of like a gaming Christmas, I think of in recent years. Like last year's show was super big. The year before that was super big. Generally nowadays, Sony does a smaller thing. Nintendo does a smaller thing. The Jeffs are often a little bit smaller. But Microsoft is really committed to this big show with tons of first-party reveals, tons of third-party reveals. They get in all the major partners, it seems like. And they usually try to top everyone else. But this year, it kind of fell flat for me. I mean, the games were not that interesting, and they weren't shown in formats that really let them express like what is interesting about this title, what is unique about this title. I feel like that was absent. I feel like maybe, you know, like that Game Freak Souls-like title, we could have seen a little bit more from it. Maybe we could have seen what makes it interesting. You know, in past years, we did see a little bit more of that format with titles like Perfect Dark, where they had like the, you know, this 4-minute, 5-minute long trailer. They showed you this vertical slice of the game. You actually got a sense of how it might play. And it was actually an interesting trailer that actually, roped you in and showed you something that actually could draw someone in and could tell you how a game works. That's something I really miss. And I felt like the Xbox Developer Direct, especially the one from this year, was a great example of that, where you had titles like Doom the Dark Ages and Expedition 33, and they're really put on the pedestal. They show you what's interesting about the game. They show you a lot of stuff that's exciting. And ultimately, they really are a huge PR beat for those games. They really do make a difference. But on the positive side, to close it out with something a bit more positive, I did like the Persona 4 Revival teaser, just because it was exactly what I wanted in my head, kind of. I did like the Ninja Gaiden trailer. That was cool. There's also Indiana Jones DLC. We didn't talk about that, but for people who like the game, I imagine that's exciting. There's also a Chronos game, I think, from Bloober Team. They showed off a little bit more of that title, not enough, in my view. But that also looks like a cool kind of Dead Spacey kind of survival horror, psychological horror mix kind of game that looks interesting. So there was some stuff in here that I was pretty intrigued by. And then also some stuff like updates for Elder Scrolls Online and a live action fishing trailer for Fallout 76. That's kind of like customary in these Microsoft showcases. Maybe it's not super interesting. But yeah, kind of just not really my favorite showcase this year, but hopefully they can come back next year. They do have those 4 key headline titles that should be really exciting. So I'm excited to hopefully hear more about those titles, maybe late this year, early next year, mid next year. That'll be exciting, I'm sure.
Yeah, there were just some weird things happening in this showcase. For example, Plague Tale Legacy, Residents of Plague Tale Legacy. I didn't know it was a Plague Tale game until right at the end of the trailer. And before that, it was, it looks mostly like a CG fest. I don't know anything about the game. It's coming next year. Surely they could have showed something that was, gameplay. Is it too much to ask? Something that's recognizable? I mean, it's just a bit weird. I mean, you don't know what these games were running on. I'm suspecting most of them are running on high-end PC, native 4K resolution, which may explain why some of the games seem to have weird performance drops. Yeah, it was just a bit weird from start to finish. Didn't quite hit for me. Any final thoughts from you there, John?
Not especially. I mean, it is what it is. Just another year, another one of these shows, and I guess this just kind of marks the beginning of the season of shows for us, right? Like we kind of watched all this from afar. But then we got Gamescom coming up. There's TGS coming up and other smaller events as well. And, I do enjoy that season. So I'm eager to see what they have. But at least I will say it feels like for the first time in years, all 3 players are back in the show circuit, so to speak, right? PlayStation, Nintendo are making more of an appearance this year from what we understand, along with Xbox. So I don't know. That's exciting.
Okay, so on that bombshell, it's the end of this particular episode of DF Direct. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it by any chance. Ring bells for notifications, that sort of thing. DF supporter program. Join our supporter program. Help support this team in everything we do. But that's all from us on this one. We'll see you next time.